Officials, right? Arab?
Hello and welcome to this WION Live broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Nina Maria Potts, and in the next 30 minutes or so, we will be bringing you the updates on stories developing around the world. First, let's take a look at the top headlines. An Indian parliamentary panel is to seek an explanation from Twitter after India's IT Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad was denied access for 60 minutes over the alleged infringement of US digital copyright law. Ahead of the Biden-Ghani meet, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that America is closely watching the rise in attacks in Afghanistan, but asserts that the status quo is not an option and the withdrawal of troops will continue. German Chancellor Angela Merkel insists that the EU should be able to talk to Russian leader Vladimir Putin after leaders from the bloc thwarted her push for a summit. Rescue teams are combing through the rubble of an oceanfront apartment block near Miami Beach that partially collapsed, killing at least 4 people and leaving at least 159 unaccounted for. Bones belonging to a new type of early human previously unknown to science have been found in Israel, researchers say. They say the findings have shed new light on human evolution. The record-breaking 15-time champions Uruguay end a 5-game winless streak as a hard-fought 2-0 victory over Bolivia clinches a quarter-final berth at the Copa America. US President Joe Biden will be meeting his Afghan counterpart Ashraf Ghani in Washington today. Ghani, who has already arrived in the US Capitol, met with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. The chairperson for the High Council for National Reconciliation, Abdullah Abdullah, has accompanied Ghani and also met with the two leaders. He said that Afghanistan has bipartisan support. The meeting comes as US troops prepared to exit Afghanistan amid a rise in Taliban attacks. The Biden administration has vowed to support the Afghan government, though the US has said it is unlikely to change its withdrawal timeline. However, Biden has said that the US will protect Afghans who helped American troops in fighting against the Taliban.
Do you know anything on these reports about moving Afghan nationals to other countries who helped during the war?
They're going to come. We've already begun the process. Those who helped us are not going to be left behind.
Washington, which has vowed to support Afghanistan even after its exit, has said that it will be sending 3 million Johnson & Johnson vaccine doses to the country. Meanwhile, the security situation in Afghanistan is on the decline, with the Taliban making advances in key provinces. Afghan troops were seen patrolling Kunduz amid fears of a Taliban offensive. The Afghan Interior Minister, who visited Kunduz, said that those who support the Taliban will be eliminated. The Taliban recently gained control of several territories, including a key town on the Tajikistan border. It also asked Afghan troops to join its ranks.
مگر زه باور او یقین درکوم چې تاسو په مټ زموږ د امنیتي او دفاعي ځواکونو او د ټول افغانستان د ولسونو په مرسته دا چا چې جګړه انتخاب کړه په دې جګړه کې به د مانځي او او تباکیږي به.
Some Taliban fighters surrendered their weapons to the Afghan government as Kabul stays firm on its decision to resist the Taliban. US and NATO troops will be leaving the war-torn country by September 11th. The withdrawal comes as part of a peace deal between Washington and the Taliban. The negotiations between the Afghan government and the Taliban are yet to see any progress. While the Biden administration maintains that the US will stick to its September 11th deadline to withdraw all its troops from Afghanistan, reports say in the wake of rising Taliban violence, there could be a shift in strategy. An Associated Press report says the United States could return a few hundred troops. Here's our next report with the details.
The United States withdrawal of forces from Afghanistan has emboldened the Islamist militant group, Taliban. The Taliban insurgents are conducting a wave of offensives, especially in the north, which is beyond the Taliban's traditional strongholds in the southern districts. On June 22nd, Taliban even captured Afghanistan's main border crossing with Tajikistan, the Sher Khan port. All this since the United States and NATO forces began withdrawing troops. The United States has maintained that it will not change its timeline of withdrawal of troops even as violence in the war-torn country rises. The White House said that U.S. troops will withdraw by September 11th.
First, I would say that our Department of Defense is overseeing an orderly withdrawal of our troops from Afghanistan and doing that at a pace that, in their view, will ensure their safety and ensure we are doing it in a way that's effective and in a coordinated manner with the government. I will say that while in general we are seeing elevated attacks on DSF and Afghan government versus a year ago, we have not seen an increase in attacks on our military presence since February 2020.
Former Afghanistan President Hamid Karzai blamed the United States for the situation in Afghanistan.
The heavy-handed, totally wrong US NATO military campaign in Afghanistan. The campaign was not against extremism or terrorism. The campaign was more against Afghan villages and homes. Putting Afghan people in prisons, creating prisons in our own country against our people, and bombing our villages. That was very wrong.
Ahead of Afghan President Ashraf Ghani's meet with US President Joe Biden, WION spoke to Afghanistan Security Council's head of international relations of the National Security Council, Ahmad Shuja, who sounded confident that Afghan forces are capable to handle and fight the Taliban.
The Afghan National and Defense Security Forces are completely capable of defending their land. They have the support of the people who are standing shoulder to shoulder to the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. What we need is diplomatic and political support to deny the Taliban the propaganda victory that they so crave by traveling across the capitals of the region, by receiving heads of diplomatic services in Doha, but also receiving continued defense and security support from the United States across the horizon. And for that, we don't really need American boots on the ground, and we respect President Biden's decision to withdraw his forces.
But with a growing concern of Afghanistan getting into a civil war, the United States is likely to retain a certain number of troops on ground. An Associated Press report says that roughly 650 US troops are expected to remain in Afghanistan. They will be providing security for diplomats. In addition, several hundred additional American forces will remain at the Kabul airport to assist Turkish troops providing security. The big question is that without the US boots on the ground, can the Afghan troops stop the Taliban juggernaut? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
An apartment building has partially collapsed in Florida's Miami, killing at least 4 people. 159 others are still missing, and rescue operations are currently underway. A part of the 12-story apartment building crumbled in the Surfside community of the coastal city. Much of the Champlain Tower's south side came down due to unknown reasons. Rescue workers evacuated over 50 victims, even though at least 100 are still missing. Miami County Commissioner
We did identify and declare as safe 102 people, and 99 we still cannot account for, some of whom may not have been in the building. So our firefighters, men and women, are working around the clock. A huge task force of people.
Miami County Commissioner officials have failed to account for over 159 people who are still believed to be trapped under debris. Rescue personnel have deployed trained dogs and drones to aid the operations. Local media reports say there was a fire at the site, which was extinguished later by the response teams. The city houses a large diaspora from several other countries. Representative Debbie Schultz said the authorities are getting the visa information from the next of kin of the victims on a war footing.
This is an international community. We are the gateway of Latin America. This community in particular has so many Israeli families, and many of them have international family members who are longing for information about their loved ones, and we're working with constituents to help get visas processed quickly so we can get their family members over here to be able to make sure that they can be standing by to get the critical news they're all waiting for.
President Joe Biden has promised to provide federal aid on request. The Champlain Towers have been under scrutiny recently due to the recertification process. The Miami-Dade police is currently investigating the incident.
And I want to thank the White House and the President, who was very forward-leaning today in saying these resources from the federal government will be made available. And what happens now is the county, who's in the lead, will say this is what we need, that we don't have, and then if the federal government has it, it becomes available to this community now and in the future.
More than 750 unmarked graves have been found near a former Catholic boarding school for Indigenous children in Canada's Saskatchewan province. The shocking discovery comes for the second time in a month. Recently, the remains of 215 children were found at a residential school in British Columbia. The new unmarked graves have been found at a former Catholic residential school. Cowess's First Nation chief says it is not clear how many remains belong to children.
As of yesterday, we have hit 751 unmarked graves. This is not a mass grave site. These are unmarked graves. Over the past years, the oral stories of our elders, of our survivors, and friends of our survivors have told us stories that knew these burials were here. In 1960, there may have been marks on these graves. The Catholic Church representatives removed these headstones.
Experts say that the site is being treated like a crime scene. Removing headstones is a crime in Canada. Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission said in a report that a cemetery was left on the Marieville site after the school building was demolished. Cowess's First Nation is in touch with the local Catholic Archdiocese to identify the remains. Authorities will be assessing each plot in the coming weeks to determine the number of victims buried at the site. Delorme has said said that the exact number of victims will not be known for weeks. Graves may contain more than one set of human remains. The revelation once again puts the spotlight on a dark chapter of Canada's history. It has opened old wounds about the lack of information and accountability about the residential school system, which operated between 1831 and 1996. Hundreds of thousands of Indigenous children were forcibly separated from their families. They were also isolated from their culture and languages. Schools were mostly Catholic and run on behalf of the federal government. Children were subjected to malnutrition, physical and sexual abuse. In early June, Pope Francis said that he was pained by the Kamloops revelation. He called for the respect of the rights and cultures of Native people. However, he stopped short of a direct apology that some Canadians had demanded. The new revelation has revived calls on the Pope and the Church to apologise for the abuse suffered at the schools. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called the findings at both Kamloops and Marieville a shameful reminder of the systemic racism, discrimination and injustice that Indigenous people have faced. Sydney is battling a surge in cases of the highly contagious Delta variant of the coronavirus. Australian authorities have put stricter curbs in place. A fresh one-week lockdown has been imposed in parts of Sydney, including Bondi Beach. Here's our report.
Parts of Sydney will enter a fresh one-week lockdown starting Friday at midnight. Australian authorities are trying to tamp down a spike in the highly contagious Delta variant of the coronavirus. The affected areas include the Sydney Central Business District, as well as the city's eastern suburbs, where the iconic Bondi Beach lies. Some doctors, however, warn the move is not enough. The Australian Medical Association called for a complete lockdown of the country's biggest city to avoid the virus spreading nationwide. But New South Wales, where Sydney is located, has held off calls for a hard lockdown. Instead, they've again made masks mandatory indoors and limited home gatherings to 5. Total infections in the newest outbreak have so far topped 60. Authorities are also worried about a potential superspreader event in a salon where 3 staff were infected and over 900 clients visited last week. Officials issued health alerts overnight for more than a dozen new venues across Sydney. Australia's COVID-19 numbers have been relatively low, aided by lockdowns, swift contact tracing, and strict social distancing rules. In response to the recent outbreak, New South Wales has been effectively isolated from the rest of the country. Other states like Queensland and Victoria have reinstated tough border rules, including a total ban for visitors from Sydney's virus-hit suburbs. Sydney is home to a fifth of the country's population of 25 million.
New Zealand is planning to strengthen its hate speech laws in response to the attack by a white supremacist in Christchurch 2 years ago. The attack left 51 Muslims dead. Our next report brings you details of changes in laws that the New Zealand government has proposed. Take a look.
It was the white supremacist attack which shocked the world in New Zealand back in March 2019, as Australian man Brenton Tarrant killed 51 people and injured dozens when he opened fire on Muslim worshippers in 2 mosques in Christchurch. Now, in response, the government said Friday that it plans to strengthen its hate speech laws and increase penalties for inciting hatred and discrimination. The move comes after a Royal Commission of Inquiry recommended changes to existing laws, which it said were weak deterrents for people targeting religious and other minority groups with hate. It noted that New Zealand's hate speech laws have resulted in just 1 prosecution and 2 civil claims so far. Justice Minister Chris Farfoy said punishment for such offences would be increased to a maximum of 3 years in prison or a fine of up to 50,000 New Zealand dollars or around $35,000 US. The current punishment is up to 7,000 New Zealand dollars or 3 months in jail.
What we are looking at is when people are speaking or commenting about a group because of their ethnicity, their religious beliefs, their sexuality, or other characteristics like their gender status, And what they are saying is intended to incite, stir up, maintain and normalise hatred against that group, that has no place in New Zealand, and we will strengthen the laws to reflect that.
The government also proposed provisions that would protect trans, gender diverse and intersex people from discrimination. The proposals are now open for public consultation.
Countries around the world are slowly reopening and welcoming tourists, whereas the city of Venice seems to be looking inwards. It needs to tackle its so-called over-tourism problem while reviving the much-needed industry at the same time. Our next report has the details.
It may be now or never for Venice. This week, the UNESCO took a rare step. It recommended Venice to be placed on the list of World Heritage Sites in danger. Italy is in the process of emerging from the devastating impact of COVID-19 pandemic. It has been 15 months since international travel was paused. Venetians now face a dual challenge: how to welcome visitors back to the picturesque city without clogging its narrow alleyways. Venice needs a plan to revive its tourism industry while keeping sustainability in mind.
Certosa Island is one of the possible samples. We're speaking about private investment into a public property with the idea of the common goods open to the public but regenerated by economic activities, mainly based on the match in between service to the residents and touristic offer.
Officials say that encouraging startups, controlling day arrivals and boosting subsidized housing for permanent residents might help. The proposals aim to make Venice the world's sustainability capital. It requires millions of dollars of investment into a series of projects. It aims to attract 12,000 new residents and create up to 20,000 new jobs. Venetians feel an urgent need to reclaim their city from mass tourism. In 2019, 25 million tourists from around the world visited the city. This comes as Venetians are having to resort to abandoning their own city in search of more affordable places to live. In the last 44 years, the city's population has shrunk from 101,000 to just over 50,000. As much as Venetians groan about the flow of tourists, the pandemic has revealed that the city needs visitors.
Perhaps there were too many, especially daytime tourists. That was a disaster. It was unbearable. Now, though, there are probably suffering because there are too few tourists. Things have to get started again. But perhaps they need to find a middle ground.
The city has also set up a state-of-the-art smart control room. It can identify how many visitors are in the city at any given moment.
If you have a QR code or something on a digital platform on your phone, we could be able to detect that and to see if you're authorized to be in the city or not. And if you're coming in and you're not authorized because you're not a tourist with a booking, you're not a student, you're not a worker, you're not a retired person who lives here, I mean, we can find you and we can ask you a fine because you are not authorized, you did not book.
Tourism industry is desperate to make a comeback. After being locked up in their houses for months, people around the world are longing for a getaway. When it comes to making a choice between over-tourism and emptiness in the city, Venice's mission is to find an equilibrium. Bureau Report WION, World is One.
Peruvians marked summer solstice by reenacting an ancient Incan ceremony called Festival of the Sun in Cusco. Here's our report. That's all we have time for on this edition of WION Live Broadcast. For more global news and updates, stay tuned to WION World is One.
There are many other...